The Browns are set to host Grant Udinski for a second interview for the team's head coaching vacancy. But league rules could complicate a potential hire due to the NFL's Rooney Rule. Is there a mystery candidate Cleveland has already interviewed to satisfy the requirement? Or could the Browns be at risk of Buffalo swooping in, with the Bills scheduled to meet with Udinski on Sunday? Let's discuss it all right here on the Daily Dawgs. Hi again, everybody, and welcome into the Daily Dawgs here on the Big Play Sports Network, presented by FanDuel. I'm Ryan Tyler, joined, as always, by Browns on SI Insider, as well as host of the Big Play Cleveland show here on the Big Play Sports Network, Nick Padone. Nick, good morning. It's January 23rd, a Friday. Our Cleveland Browns still do not have a head coach, but that's okay. I think we're getting to that point where we're getting really close to naming that one for Kevin Stefanski's successor. Nick, good morning. You've had a long morning already on the Fan.
Yeah, long morning. We finally got an interview for our Cleveland Browns today, which is good. They were idle on Wednesday. Mike McDaniel canceled. They were idle on Thursday. Jesse Minter canceled. We covered all of that here on the Daily Dog, so make sure to throw us a sub on the Big Play Cleveland YouTube channel. We appreciate everybody that's tuned in this week. Next week, we're going to be right back at it with our Browns legends, Phil Taylor, Josh Cribbs, Hanford Dixon. The top dogs will join us on the Daily Dogs, but excited that the Browns actually getting a little bit of work done today on the head coaching forefront, as they will meet in person in a very cold Berea, Ohio, with Grant Udinski, the Jacksonville Jaguars offensive coordinator. And that's a notable one because it definitely feels like Udinski is the first guy that they're seriously meeting with for the second time that's high on their wish list. They've already met with Jim Schwarz, their own defensive coordinator that's been in the building for 3 years. They also met with Todd Monken, who was here in 2019 as the offensive coordinator with Freddie Kitchens. But I think today is where things really actually get serious for our Browns, Ryan.
Well, Grant Udinski in Cleveland today for his second interview with the Cleveland Browns. Jeremy Fowler, ESPN insider, says Browns hosting Jags OC Grant Udinski today in Cleveland. The interest in Udinski is real. The expectation as of now is Cleveland goes into next week with the search and definitely wants to speak with Rams assistant Nate Scheelhaase, but Udinski has his chance to impress in person. Nick, we are detectives. We're all about semantics here at the Big Play Sports Network. You found Jeremy Fowler's wording of this tweet a little bit interesting.
Yeah, this wording is interesting. The part where he says the expectation as of now is that the Browns go into next week with their search. That's fascinating because we're operating under the belief that it has to go into next week because they have not, at least that we know of, fulfilled the Rooney Rule obligations of 2 external minority candidates meeting in person for this job. We're going to talk a little bit about Buffalo and how they're catching up in this process. Browns still haven't fulfilled it. We think that they're going to have their first interview with the minority candidate externally next week, early on Monday or Tuesday, when they get to meet with Nathan Scheelhaase, the Rams passing game coordinator. They obviously haven't been allowed to do so this week because he's preparing LA for the NFC Championship game. So I thought the wording on that post was very fascinating because the expectation is for it to go into next week. But what if it doesn't? What if it doesn't? What's that mean? And I've gotten asked that a bunch. What's it look like if you don't fulfill the Rooney Rule? Well, it's probably a pretty hefty fine that Jimmy Haslam would have to pay, and I don't know that he wants to pay that because he's probably still, going to have to be paying out Kevin Stefanski and Tommy Rees, let those guys out of their contracts to go coach the Atlanta Falcons. And obviously you've got all this dead money still owed to Deshaun Watson. But I think it's the loss of draft picks. Like, Haslam has the money if it's a fine, whatever, if they love Udinski. But the league would probably take away some draft picks also, if I had to guess. And I think the Browns, the Browns, to their credit, and they don't get credit for much on the field because they haven't won much, but they truly, genuinely have one of the most diverse organizations in football from top down. They have women in their front office. They have minority coaches literally littered with throughout the staff. Glenn Cook, the assistant GM, and the GM are both minorities. So they've done a great job with diversity, and I think that they want to actually treat this Rooney Rule seriously, and I don't think they want to bring in somebody like an Antonio Pierce that knows that they're absolutely have no chance of getting this job, and they're literally just showing up in Cleveland to check a box, file some paperwork to the league office, and they could go about their merry way. Like, I think the Browns are actually trying to make sure that they oblige by this process and make sure that it's meaningful and they're not just wasting people's time.
There are instances, like, to get around this rule, not get around, but sham interviews is exactly what you're getting at. They are sham interviews. Like, I'm not saying that the Miami Dolphins, that's what they did, but to fulfill this rule, they released that they interviewed a minority candidate, and then I believe an hour later they announced they hired Jeff Hafley to be their NFL head coach there in Miami. So I do think it's important to note, though, it is a rule, and rules can be broken. There are consequences. Did a little digging. I saw that the Detroit Lions in 2003, I believe it was, they were fined. I believe it was $300,000. No draft picks have been taken away. I haven't had that instance. So I guess it is possible here in Cleveland. But, Nick, that leads to our next point, kind of. I don't want to jump too far ahead till we get to maybe a mystery candidate that the Cleveland Browns haven't announced, because they don't have to announce that they've interviewed a candidate. Could be behind the woodwork as long as they file that paperwork to the NFL. But before we get to that, Nick, it really does seem like it's Grant Udinski, Nathan Schillhouse, the two front runners right now. And I don't want to get on here and just regurgitate what everybody says because you have your belief. Some people in Jim Schwarz being the right decision. Other people want the high upside swing into Grant Udinski. I'm certainly one of those. I know you are too. But I know you want to make your case why Grant Udinski should be the next Cleveland Browns head coach.
Yeah, I definitely like Udinski. I wish there was a world, and maybe there is a world if the Browns. Here's the other piece with the Rooney Rule. Like they don't have to announce every single candidate that they've met with. So there's this idea that maybe behind closed doors they've met with a college coach that could be of a diverse background that would check a box for the Rooney Rule. And obviously a college coach wouldn't want that public. Their agent isn't going to leak that out to these national insiders because they don't want them to pick it up and run with it and mess up their transfer portal and their NIL, as all of that is front and center in college football right now. So I've toyed with the idea of maybe they've met with some people already that we don't know and that maybe they can hire Udinski today. I kind of doubt it, though. It feels like Udinski's going to interview with the Browns today. He's then going to meet with the Buffalo Bills on Sunday, which gives me pause. But this is my front runner, and it's been my front runner really since the day after Kevin Stefanski was fired, because Andrew Berry said in that press conference that their list of candidates will look very different. And he said that it's not a prerequisite that they've had head coaching experience. It's not even a prerequisite that they've had head coaching interviews. And Grant Udinski's getting ready to go through his second round interview, and he only had a first round interview with the Browns so far. He has yet to meet with the Buffalo Bills, and those are the only two teams that are interested in speaking with him. I think this is a guy, when we're talking about the Browns and why they made this move, it comes back to the quarterback thing. Kevin Stefanski wasn't able to make it work out with Baker Mayfield, and he wasn't able to make it work out with Deshaun Watson, and they had 9 other starting quarterbacks to pair with those guys in his 6 seasons here. So it's time to solve quarterback. And I look at Udinski in Minnesota. He made it work with Sam Darnold, which is a retread option. That could be an option for the Browns this offseason. He's made it work with Trevor Lawrence, who's a young player that had a bit of experience and then had a career season under Udinski's watch. So I like that he's done it with both veteran quarterbacks and younger quarterbacks. And I think when we're trying to solve this, there's going to be no easy off-ramp for the Browns to solve their quarterback thing this offseason. There's no apparent answer with the number 6 overall pick in the NFL draft, and I have a hard time believing the Raiders are going to give up that number 1 overall pick and the rights to draft Fernando Mendoza. And even if they decide to trade that number 1 pick, nobody could beat the New York Jets, who will have more ammunition than everybody to trade up and make a splash. So when we're talking about this, I want to see Udinski get some life out of Shedeur Sanders if there's anything there, and we could get a bona fide answer to that in 2027. Perhaps we get an answer on Deshaun Watson as the veteran retread option in 2027 with a fresh set of eyes and a fresh offensive ideology around him. And if that doesn't work, guess what? You're right back into the well in the 2027 NFL draft, and you've got then a 31-year-old head coach ushering in a first-round quarterback, something that the Browns haven't invested much in 2027 with a QB class that's thought to be the real deal. And I actually tend to agree with that thought, that it is going to be much better than what the last 2 seasons have been. So I definitely like the idea of skewing younger, and Udinski would be my front runner, even over Schillhouse, who they do really like, and I think he's a serious candidate also.
Nick, I'm a little confused why people seem to think that hiring a guy like Grant Udinski is such a risk. Because, one, the Browns aren't in a position where next year you have this expectation to win. Like, if you're the Giants, you went and got John Harbaugh because you want that CEO leader type, because you feel like you have a team to win. Like, the Giants are going to be the next sexy pick to double their win total from last year. Like, this year's team was the Patriots. Everybody's picking them to double their win total. They had the quarterback in place they believed was the future. You get the coach in there, and that happened, right? But the Browns aren't in that position because of the quarterback you mentioned. And what's the worst that happens? This isn't some deal where you're signing away draft picks like you did when you traded for Deshaun Watson. If the year goes bad, then you evaluate it. Hey, did I see enough from Grant Udinski to believe that once we get a quarterback in here, this offense can continue to take strides? And if it's not, which I don't see this happening, you cut him after 1 year. Like, Jimmy Haslam, I'm sure as hell doesn't want to do that again. As you proved with Kevin, he gave him 6 years here. That's a pretty big runway, all things considered, in the NFL these days and age. Why is everybody acting like hiring Grant Udinski is such a risk for this Browns team? You're in the position where your defense is ready to win. Go take a risk to fix this offense, and hopefully you swim in the fruits of that labor.
Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe because he's 30. He's 30, but he has 6 years of NFL experience. And when we're talking about Sean McVay and trying to find the next McVay, is a similar thing. He's 30. He had 8 years of 2 more years than Udinski does of NFL experience. And when you look at it, he's been with multiple organizations, which I think is another thing that he actually has going for him. He was with the Panthers during the pandemic. Then in 2022, he was with the Minnesota Vikings. 2023 and 2024 remained in Minnesota with the Vikings, and then 2025 through present day, he's been with the Jaguars. So a big piece of the head coach interview, especially in the second chapter of the process, is they start to really get into the nitty gritty. First round, get to know you, your thoughts, your ideologies, all that. Maybe here in the second round is where you discuss, all right, Nate, Grant, whichever, young candidate that you're talking to, what's the staff look like here? Who you want as your defensive coordinator? If you're going to be the head coach, are you hiring an offensive coordinator? Who are the receivers coaches? And for somebody like Udinski, he's been in the league in multiple different markets, so he probably has a nice Rolodex of contacts, despite being 30 years old, that he would be able to call and get to coach with him here in Cleveland. And that is another reason why I'm higher on him than I am even Schwarz, who's only been in the league for 2 years, and he's only been with the Rams. So prior to LA, he was in the college football ranks in 2023 with Iowa State as their offensive coordinator. So I tend to skew Udinski just because he's been around the block. He's been with multiple organizations. 6 years of experience is just about what Sean McVay had when he had 8 years of experience when the Rams hired him. I think this just lines up really nicely for the Browns to let their plan be known that right now this is a transition period. It is a little bit of a retool, and they probably aren't going to be very good next year. They very well could lose double-digit games again next year with multiple quarterbacks. But if you could solve the QB thing in 2027 and you feel really good about this head coach and that this head coach is going to be a prime candidate in 2027, matches up with that Jordan Schultz reporting pretty nicely, doesn't it? Where he said that the Browns would be willing to take a shot on somebody that they believe will be a strong head coach at some point down the road. This all maps out really nicely for both Udinski, but don't rule out Schwarz either.
Nick, the offense stinks. The offense is absolutely
breaking
putrid,
news.
And nobody
printed on Browns on SI. Browns offense not very good,
and there's nobody in Berea right now that was on the staff last year that is going to fix this offense. Now, is Grant Udinski automatically going to come in here and fix the offense? No, but you got to go get something to make a change. Staying parallel within whoever in Berea, I don't think the move to Jim Schwartz head coach is really going to be that efficient of changing anything. I don't see who he's going to hire as OC or promote internally as OC, whether somehow you go down the route of hiring Jim Schwartz and you manage to pull Nate Schwarz or something, or give Grant Udinski the offensive coordinator role, even though I don't think he'd come here. Even if you could tell him he could call plays, I'm sure he'd rather stay in Jacksonville. Nick, if I'm reading this correctly, if the Browns did somehow have a mystery candidate that we don't know about, that they fulfilled the Rooney Rule, unless Grant Udinski bombs his interview today, right? The Browns should leave today, Friday, with a new head coach and Grant Udinski, correct?
So if the mystery candidate thing is real, and that's like the
it's
big
all hinging
if,
on that.
The thing is, there's no way to know, and there's no way to ever know. But the one thing that I'll give credence to the mystery candidate theory on is that there's precedent for this. The Haslam family met with Jim Harbaugh, not John Harbaugh, Jim Harbaugh, years ago when he was exploring the move from college football to the National Football League for the first time. The Browns had a meeting with him, formal meeting, and they were able to submit that to the league office. And had he been a minority candidate, that would have counted towards the Rooney Rule. And obviously that didn't come public till years and years down the line that the Browns were interested in the Harbaugh family, but it eventually came out. So I wonder, and I floated on the radio this morning if people got really mad at me, I'm not saying that they're going to hire Deion Sanders, but didn't Deion seem pretty present over the last 5 to 6 weeks of the season? And obviously that's because his son was playing. I'm no dummy to that. But didn't it seem like he was captured like on camera, on photo, on video, numerous occasions, seeming pretty jubilant, having conversations with Jimmy Haslam and J.W. Johnson and some of the other Browns ownership groups? So like I just don't think we could completely discard the idea that there's been a minority candidate. Even Steve Sarkisian, I believe, has some like Middle East Eastern roots. I don't know the like nitty gritty details of the Rooney Rule and like what percent minority you need to leave that where it will be. But there's a possibility that they've met with somebody behind closed doors, and we'll never know. They're, multi-billionaires that have so many resources that they could travel to wherever they want in the world and meet with these candidates and have nobody find out.
Nick, I'm going to be very upset if Grant Udinski goes to Buffalo, has an interview with Sunday. He's not named head coach of the Cleveland Browns. And then could you see that turning into Grant Udinski becoming the next head coach of the Buffalo Bills?
So let's talk a little bit about the process, right? Mike McDaniel, word comes out today on Friday that he's actually parked on signing the paperwork to join the Chargers as their OC, and he'll meet with Buffalo in Miami, Florida, for the head coach opening of the Bills today. That's fascinating because that's a Rooney Rule interview, as we know very well here in Cleveland. And then Friday and Saturday, they also have interviews set up. And Sunday, the Bills are closing their first round of interviews with Grant Udinski. So if they want to hire Udinski after Sunday, first thing Monday morning, they'd be within their rights to do so because they've checked all of their boxes. And as far as we know it, the Browns have not checked all of their boxes. So again, I like the candidates that the Browns are chasing. I'm high on Udinski. I'm optimistic about Schwarz. But the way that they've gone about this, the process and the order of operations, it hasn't made a lot of sense, and you could poke some holes in it, especially if something like that were to shake out where Buffalo would be able to possibly steal your top candidate away. That'd be bad.
So I'm looking at this. You're right. Friday, obviously, you mentioned today Mike McDaniel interviewing that applies for the Rooney Rule. And then Saturday, you mentioned they're also interviewing two more minorities in Anthony Lynn and Anthony Weaver.
Yep.
So Sunday, you're right. They could easily turn around and hire Grant Udinski. So you're thinking, okay, if you're the Browns, then they don't satisfy the Rooney Rule. Saturday, you're going to have to sneak. And I hate saying sneak because that makes me think it's just a sham interview to fulfill this Rooney Rule. But right now, you're 0 for 2. You got to get somebody because you're not getting Nate Schwarz till after Sunday.
Right. So the thing is, I would keep your eye on, and we'll be back at the Daily Dawgs on Monday. I'd keep your eye on what happens with the Browns and what they're announcing on both Saturday and Sunday, especially depending on what happens with Udinski today. Like, because if Udinski blows their socks off, it's unfortunate to say maybe they do just go sham interview route. And Saturday they meet with somebody really quickly and they try to beat the buzzer on Buffalo's meeting with Udinski on Sunday, or they try to, let him meet with them just for credence sake. And then first thing Monday morning, they interview Schwarz, and Tuesday they come to a final decision. It's kind of how I see this thing shaking out. I will say I'd be surprised if by this time next week we don't have an answer. That means something somewhere in the process has gone horribly astray, and maybe that's ultimately what they decide to do. If Buffalo screws them up, or if Schwarz doesn't want to leave LA, which is possible. McVay's floated the idea of retirement once before. Who's to say he doesn't want to just stay put? Maybe then the Browns have to just put the car in reverse, turn it around, say we're expanding our search, get Sean McDermott in here, get a couple other coaches in here, and kind of restart the process fresh. Teams have done that before. Teams have certainly gone through that process before, but I'd say if by next Friday they don't have a new head coach at least named, I'd be a little surprised and alarmed.
Well, Nick, I was going to end the show by asking you, screw Friday. I'm asking you, call your shot. Do the Browns have a head coach by Monday's Daily Dawgs show?
I don't think so.
Really?
I think we'll be talking Monday about Schwarz and the pros and cons of Schwarz.
So, okay, then that leads me to ask you this. Do you really think that they would wait and risk Grant Udinski to get that second interview with Schwarz?
I think as far as we know, they're going to have no choice. They're going to have no choice but to do that. They don't have, as we're recording right now, they don't have anything scheduled for Saturday. They don't have anything scheduled for Sunday. Their next known meeting is early next week. It doesn't even have a date attached to it for Nathan Schwarz. And obviously that's dependent on what happens with the Rams. Like, who's to say he doesn't work out an agreement with McVay if the Rams win? Hey, I'm parking all of this until we find out what happens in the Super Bowl. That would delay it even further. So the process has been mind-boggling. I can't really wrap my head around why they've slow played this portion of it. I get that there's no rush to name your next head coach ever. You want to make sure you're hiring the right candidate, but the process has seemed a little bit funny, and I think Mike McDaniel backing out Wednesday really caused some things to go awry for them.
All right, Nick, really the last thing here before we wrap up on the Daily Dogs. I already know how we feel about this coaching search. It's given us anxiety. How do you think Jim Schwarz feels in all of this? Because you have your second interview, and that was the first one a long time ago. Now you're hearing all the news. Well, they want to hire this young shot, and are you going to stay on the staff? Kind of just feels like Jim Schwarz, if everything goes wrong, you're our backup option.
Yeah. That's really what it feels like. It feels like if Udinski winds up in Buffalo or just decides to stay in Jacksonville, and same thing with Schwarz, he could wind up with the Steelers. We haven't even, fathomed that. Or maybe the Steelers go with Mike McCarthy and they bring in Schwarz as the OC contingency plan if the game really has passed McCarthy by. There's so many different scenarios where this can play out, where Jim Schwarz is the guy that was the first guy up for the second round of interviews on Monday. That feels like a lifetime ago, by the way. Monday feels like such a long time ago, and he's just kind of waiting in the balance. And I do think for Jim Schwarz, ultimately, he wants to be a head coach. I think he's made that known, especially through the leaks, that he'd contemplate a departure if he doesn't get this job. But we're going to have to just see those dominoes where they fall. Like, I really think that if he came back as an associate head coach with one of the biggest pay raises that a defensive coordinator has ever seen, he's going to be content here, because a lot of these teams are already starting to fill up their DC opening. So you don't want to back your way out of this job without having a better one lined up. And candidly, is there a better defensive coordinator opening than Cleveland where you get to coach Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward? I'm not so sure.
Nick, I don't want to speak for you, but if everything goes awry with Udinski and Schwarz, they both get sniped somehow, somewhere else, some other team. If we end up just promoting Jim Schwarz to our head coach position, to be honest with you, Nick, I feel like at that point I would have just rather kept Stefanski.
I think something had to change. I think they had to get rid of Stefanski, and I think you could at least be optimistic about a new, fresh blood OC coming in if, like, the worst case scenario, last resort, they hire Jim Schwarz. I think something had to change. Like, I wouldn't go as far to say that I would have rather kept Kevin, because I think ownership let you know how Haslam felt when he said out loud after firing Stefanski, this roster's talented, man. It's not as bad as it's been in ghosts of Cleveland Browns past, and they won 8 games over the last 2 seasons, and that's just not good enough. And there's somebody out there that they're going to get to coach this thing. There's only 32 of these jobs. I really don't think it's going to be Jim Schwarz. Maybe we're dead wrong about that. Maybe it is. Maybe both of these young guys blow off the Browns the same way McDaniel and Minter did, and you wind up with Schwarz. To me, though, it really would feel like, and we've been through this, Ryan, on the show, it would feel like if you go forward with Schwarz, that you're probably doing this in 2027. And if not in 2027, then probably in 2028.
Well, we'll be here to cover it when it all unfolds. For Nick Padone, I'm Ryan Tyler. Appreciate everybody tuning into the Daily Dogs today and all this week. Very excited here at the Big Play Sports Network. We'll be back on Monday. Will we have a head coach? I don't know, but we'll be here to talk about it. See you Monday.